Just a quick word from your co host, John Mickton at the International Schools Podcast. Just want to apologize for this episode. There was a sound issue and it's not the best audio. And as it's sometimes really challenging to connect with our guests, I didn't want to redo it. But thank you for your patience and understanding. And hopefully, we've solved the issue. Thanks so much. Have a good episode. Welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co host, John Mickton. Dan is away and will be with us next time. One of the things that I'm sure all of us, as you know, the winter and the spring and nicer weather comes out, is the idea of screen time. And screen time has become quite contentious, and there is a lot of traffic on that, especially in the school setting for parents and teachers and schools. And I think many of our listeners have mentioned before that John Hyatt's book, The Anxious Generation. And here in Europe, Sophie Wilkman's work with in the UK has been gaining a lot of traction, kind of this idea that we should get rid of phones and technology in schools and that they just act as a distraction. So those are kind of two voices that are out there. And then what's interesting, and as with any situation, we always have those counter voices, and there's some phenomenal research in this area by two researchers out of the UK. And I'm going to get to my notes because their names are it's Adam Poborski and Amy, mm, and I will put it in the show notes. But also Jacqueline Nessie's book, Techno Sapiens Ultimate Guide. These three people have really been talking, kind of countering John Haight's and Sophie Wilkman's work on this issue, saying that actually it's far more nuanced and that just taking phones away and taking technology away is kind of a knee jerk reaction. Now, John Haidt and Sophie Wilkman might completely disagree, but we have these two different camps, and then there are people that sit in the middle. There's no doubt the way these things are designed to grab our attention, and those are the things that often generate the tensions in the home when you want to go to dinner or you want your child not to be on the screen and they have a petulant frenzy, or having to manage screen time. The other thing is, if we think about screen time, Mary Aiken's work in the cyber effect, she always says, and I love this quote by her, we're asking the wrong questions. We should be not asking when is it appropriate for a child to have a digital device, but we should be asking when is it appropriate for an adult to have a digital device in front of a child. And I think some of those things are really important as we think about digital screens, screen time, and well-being and balance. And I know through COVID, a lot of this well-being narrative kind of enhanced itself because we realized we were spending so much time more on screens. But then on the flip side, I just think of my mother that's 90 years old. She needs to have a screen because her bank, that's the only way she can interact with her bank. And many of the things that she does day to day require that screen interaction to be able to tap into the resources or participate in the economy. So I think as all of us agree, and many schools are starting to say no phones, you see that more and more, and that's been happening for quite a while. Well, other schools might be taking a more nuanced approach and saying, well, hold on here. Let's really focus on some of the learnings and let's really understand what is behind this. So I'm really excited because I think this topic is something that we all are involved with, especially in schools. It's gotten a lot of traction because the Anxious Generation did kind of the talk show tour, and there was a lot of spotlight on this topic. But today I have Patrick Green, who is an educator, a keynote speaker, and consultant, and has worked for 20 years in international schools as an educational technology leader. And now he really focuses on supporting parents, educators, and students to kind of build these healthy digital habits and making those meaningful connections online and offline. And I just think it's really exciting to have Patrick here because he's currently actually traveling, working with international schools, and he has a wonderful website called Winning Screen Time. And I really invite you to spend some time and pop over there. It is in the show notes. And he has some other resources that I think are well worth looking. As all of you that are our listeners always say how much you enjoy the show notes. So definitely think about popping over there. He wrote a wonderful book that I often refer to, Classroom Management in the Digital Age. Patrick, a warm welcome to the International Schools Podcast. It's so exciting because this topic is so sometimes emotionally laden, and there are different ideas and different feelings, and sometimes people go to extremes. I just think you're the right person to be here today to have that conversation. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, John. It's great to be here. And yes, I think there does need to be a little more balance and less extremism in a lot of our conversations, but certainly this one around screen time, especially when it comes to people we really care about, which is our youngsters. And that's what I'm trying to bring to the conversation. You mentioned a number of people who are lending their voices to this topic. And I want to lend a voice that helps people who are looking for something other than a one size fits all approach. And that's what I bring, is that it is nuanced. Everybody has a unique child, and even our own lenses, our biases, our upbringing, our values, our different cultural perspectives, our religious perspectives, we bring all of this to the parenting that we do, which means the sort of a one size fits all approach likely isn't going to work in our families with our children.
Yeah, and I think this is something that if you look at the different pieces of research and you kind of try to find a middle ground, I think what you're saying is really true. It's kind of how do we make it not one size fits all and understand the complexity and the kind of the diversification of the different learner types and children and families and contexts, be it cultural or even just within the dynamics of the family. So from the work with the work that you do with families, one of the things that often parents struggle with is they want to model healthy screen habits, but when they themselves feel overwhelmed and distracted on their own devices, how do you navigate that? Because so often you see cases where a parent is saying, "Get off your device," and they're looking at their device and maybe quickly doing a Slack channel response for work or something like that.
Yeah, I think modeling is one of the main things we can do for young people. I mean, you think about your own uh, upbringing, John. Do you remember what your parents said, or do you remember what they modeled every day? Right? I mean, they might have said some phrases, but like in my family, those are things that we kind of tease each other about. Like, Dad always said, but actually, the values that we carry with us, those are the things we saw our parents doing, right? Like we saw in my own family that we leave places better than we found them. Not because Dad ever said that, but because that's how he lived, right? Like when we cleaned up our campsites better and packed out other people's trash, he was instilling in us these values because of what he did. And then we young people, as we grow older, we take those values with us. And so, yes, modeling is huge, John. How do people do it? Well, I think the first thing is we put the phone down in front of our children. I mean, that's actually an easy rule. It's not easy until you think about it. But if you've got a teenager, you don't actually have a lot of time in the same room with a teenager, right? Like they're in their room. You can hear them coming down the stairs, and they're probably going through the room you're in to get to the kitchen to find something to snack on, and then they're gone again, right? So what if every time your kid passed you in this house, because you hear them coming, you put the phone down and you're just available. I don't have the data in front of me, John, but there's Common Sense Media collected some data a while back where it was like over 50% of young people said they wished their parents were more available. They wished their parents would put the phone down.
And that's interesting that you say that, because we had Merv Lupus from Common Sense Media, and he alluded to that quite a few times in the conversation, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, we have young people. You hear all the stories about the kid at the park who looks over at their parent. They want to show them this. They're going down the slide, or they're doing a flip, or they want to demonstrate something to their parents, but they can't get their parents' attention because they're looking at the phone. And I don't want to do sort of the parent shaming thing about, like, I get it. Your kid's going up and down the slide. How interesting. It's okay for you to take care of some business really quickly. But in general, we want to be available for our young people. And so a rule that you can have in your home is, when my child and I are in the same room, I put the phone down. Now you start to unpack what that really looks like, John. And then I've had some parents say to me, like, well, yeah, but what if the phone rings or beeps or buzzes, and I've got multiple children? I want to see if it's my other child. I say, oh yeah, let's do that. Let's say out loud. So this is the next thing you can do, modeling. You can say what your action is. If you are using the phone in front of your child, you speak it out loud. You're never going to say, John, you're never going to say, oh, I'm playing Candy Crush. Because you're not doing that when your child is in the room. So you can say to your child, oh, I'm checking this message because I'm wondering if it's your sister who needs a ride home. Well, John, that's not modeling that the phone is more important than the child you're with. That's modeling, I care about all of my children's safety, and my responsibility is to go pick this child up, and I want to make sure, like, you're modeling caring for one another. You're modeling caring for humans, even in that case. But the other thing you could do, of course, is you can set your ringtones to be individual people, right? You could set it up so that you actually heard the ringtone from the specific child or whatever. The point is, there are a number of things we can do, and it can start simply by just putting the phone down when you're in the presence of your child, to model.
I think what you're saying is this intentionality that actually, one little action of putting the phone down has a ripple effect with much greater impact than sometimes we think. And the fact that as your kid's going up and down, that they see you're standing there at the ready, is in itself a really nice message compared to be, you want some snack and then put your head back down. So I like the way that you're alluding to this idea of being really intentional, and understanding the intent can have also a super important impact, especially the way you were talking about going to pick up the daughter that was at a play date, and being transparent and saying, it's kind of making the thinking visible about what you're doing on the phone, so there's a context for the child to understand that. One of the things that we are many of these ecosystems are designed specifically to keep our attention, and there is a lot of thought that goes into that. They're behavior psychologists, they're behavior marketers. When you are creating, and the tech companies that are behind that really need to leverage our attention as much as possible. And as you are a younger adolescent, or even I'm thinking of the children that I work as, from 9 up or even 8 up, that ability to navigate one's own attention and reinforcement and rewards is much more difficult. How do you kind of address that with parents, or how do you highlight that there is this kind of third party in the room that is making everything in their power to make sure you stay on the phone?
Well, I think with students, I highlight that, right? In my work, when I go into schools with both high school and middle school students, I talk about it. I demonstrate some of the things that these apps and games are doing to keep our attention. And the thing is, middle school kids and high school kids don't like to be tricked. Like, when you shine a light on some of these things, it does make people pause. And I do feel like there's, we're not often enough engaging in a conversation with our young people, right? We tell them what to do, we set some boundaries, but we're not sort of educating them on some of these things. They don't want to be controlled by these apps and games. And so I think, one, we need to highlight how these things are working, and then we need to be asking kids questions. And and then asking them, is there anything they want to do about it? I'll give you an example, John. A parent was saying that their child, realizes that they didn't want to spend 2 hours on Instagram, but they did. And so, what can we do about it? Well, you can ask your child, how long does, and I know this is going to go against some of the stuff out there, John, but there's some 13-year-olds that have social media. So let's just say a 13-year-old has Instagram. You might say to that 13-year-old, how long do you think you need to use this app a day? Like what's okay? What's healthy? Well, in this family, what happened is the child told the mom, oh, I think I only need 30 minutes. And so the mom, of course, is like, well, then let's set the limit for 30 minutes, right? Because the child gave a much lower number than the mom thought. But the child was able to say, I did not want to spend 2 hours on Instagram. And I'm surprised I did. And now that I'm looking at the data, and maybe I should back up, John, one of the things I encourage parents to do is look at the data with your child and ask questions, right? All of these devices collect how much time we're spending on all of these things.
Yeah.
And so you can say, let's look together. And in fact, if a parent is also struggling, right, we can be accountability partners, and we can say together, here's what I'm noticing about my screen that I don't like, that I want to work on. And you're saying, here's what you're noticing. Oh, I just thought of this. I had another dad who told me when they had this conversation with their child about how much time do you need to be on TikTok? The daughter said 30 minutes. And the dad actually said, okay, we're going to set the app, the parental control feature, not for 30 minutes. We're going to set it for 45 because I want to give you some opportunity to fail. I want you to see it. Can you only do 30 minutes? But I'm actually going to give you a little leeway to see if you can have some of your own self-control. And I thought, well, that was brilliant. Like he honored, right? They worked together on this. He honored her voice, but he actually gave her space to try to do it on her own.
And I think the message, which I think is so important that you're highlighting, and the anecdotes that you've shared, is this idea of shared ownership in the conversation and shared agency, that the parent and the child both have agency in that conversation with their own data points. So it's not the parent looking only at the child's data, but they're looking at their own, and they're both saying, oh, that's interesting. I'm doing more of this. I'm doing more of this. And I think when you have that kind of conversation and that mutual agency, there's kind of suddenly the playing field becomes level, and there's a sense of respect, and there's a sense of like, oh, we're going to work on this together. And I think that's also a wonderful family moment where families can spend the time together. But one of the things that I often hear, because I work with a lot of parents, is that they say, I just don't have time to do that. And the word time keeps coming back. And I'm wondering, how are you addressing this when parents say, oh, Mr. Green, that's a great idea, but I'm always on the road, or, I have a nanny, or whatever it might be. And I'm curious, how are you framing your response, or what are you suggesting to parents that just find the issue of time in itself a problem to engage in this way?
Well, John, I am sympathetic to that. I think all humans that are using technology today are feeling sort of a more overwhelm of information than they've ever felt. So if you're a busy person, you're also dealing with just life being busier than it used to be prior to these phones in our pocket, right? Prior to all of this connection, this hyperconnectivity, it's a busier thing. Now, I think that can also help us to be empathetic for teenagers who feel similarly. They're feeling not only do they need to keep up with what their friends are up to, but they're feeling like they need to keep up with what their friends are watching and consuming, because they don't want to lose their place in their in their friend group, right? And so if people are talking about the latest episode of whatever everybody's watching, like kids are feeling this pressure also that they don't have enough time in their lives to be the friends that they want to be. Now, we can poo-poo that idea, or we can have some empathy for them. And so when parents talk to me about how busy they feel and how they don't have time to do all of this, I want them to realize young people today also feel really busy. They don't, right? And so they're feeling pulled at as well. So that feeling is something that we can empathize with young people. But that doesn't get to the point of what can parents do. Well, I don't know exactly how to answer it, John, because I can't give people more time. That doesn't exist.
Is it
But I know
maybe
that people,
rethinking what time is, how we perceive time, and what is, because at the beginning you talked about this child coming down for a snack and walking back up, and the move was just to put the phone down. So now we are making a moment in time where we're available. They might take it or not. Is it maybe us reconstructing what time is and defining? It's a bit like the idea of not all screens are created equal. I'm just wondering, when you talk to these parents about time and your own reflection and research and work that you're doing as a consultant, is that something that you hear people as kind of recalibrating what time means in their context?
well, I think so, John. I think one of the things that we can do is say, let's recapture some time for what matters. And so people tend to schedule what matters, right? If you're someone who really
Yeah,
cares about your fitness, you schedule it.
yeah,
So we need to schedule some parenting here. Like if we believe that having conversations is really important to helping these young people learn to navigate these digital lives, and our young people are online and offline, they go back and forth. And so if we feel like we've got to mentor them in that area, then we need to schedule some time. And I'm not even saying, John, pull out the calendar and block an hour here for a conversation. I'm actually saying, as a family, can we just have some routines where we don't have our phones out? You
yeah.
know, uh, can we just do device-free dinner, or or what? I don't know. What is does your family go on a walk after every meal? I know some families do. Like, where do we find that time for connection? And then the other thing, John, is what is it that you want your child to be doing besides the screen? Because often when we're talking about screen time and we start counting up the minutes a kid is on a screen, that's data, but it's not the most informative data. It doesn't actually tell us what they were doing, right? So an hour of Zooming with your grandmother is very different than 30 minutes of scrolling self-harm videos online, right? Like we would look at those, the hour was longer than the half hour, but the half hour is way more harmful potentially to that young person, right? So time is tough to measure in that way, or you can measure it, but it's not the best metric. And so another thing to do is to shift the way we talk about time, and what is the screen time replacing? And so you can get way more comfortable with the amount of time your child is on a screen if you can look at all the other factors, the healthy factors that we need to be looking at, like how much is my kid sleeping? How much physical movement is my child getting every day? Is my child still getting lots of opportunities for face-to-face relationship building? Those are the things that actually we should think about time.
Yeah, I love that. And what about then is the idea that you mentioned the screen time with grandma for an hour and then a half hour of self-harm videos. Yeah, that's pretty daunting. Uh, I'm just wondering, do you tell parents not all screens are created equal? Is that one of the strategies? Is to, because you did mention here, you look at your data on your phone and it says an hour and a half of screen time. But if we just use the word screen time, and you did a lovely way of differentiating that there are different screen times, is that something that parents should understand? There's passive screen time, there's screen on the side, there's educational screen time, there's creative screen time, et cetera, et cetera. What is your thought on identifying the screen times and using that as a way to move forward on when to do it and not?
Yeah, I think quality versus quantity. I think quality is the way more important conversation to be having about what our kids doing, all those things you just mentioned. I would rather, and in fact, if you look at the data of how our youngest kids use screens, they tend to do more passive watching of videos than, creating or even game playing. And actually some people, prefer, watching. It's okay for my kid to watch a half hour of Dora the Explorer, but I don't want them playing a video game. And when you think about what's actually going on with the child's brain, in a video game, they could be collaborating, they could be building something, creating something that's never existed before. They could be, right? They could also be, shooting things up and blowing stuff up. But the idea of passive is not as good as active. I want my kid doing, create. And here's one way I tell parents to think about the time. If your child was off doing screens for an hour and they can show you something they're proud of when they're done, that might have been a pretty good use of that hour.
Yeah.
Whereas if there's nothing to demonstrate, like, what did you do? I don't know. I mean, the time went by and I just sat here.
And they come back within a bad mood and have a tantrum on the floor.
Yes.
And I think I really appreciate you highlighting that actually the video game might be more of a valuable screen time than watching Dora, especially if they're problem solving and, as you said, collaborating or whatever. One of the things that and I'm sure you've seen the work of John Haidt and Sophie Wilkman's. One of the thing is the idea of banning phones in schools. And I know that you are going to schools that are banning phones or about to ban phones. I remember doing this in Luxembourg 7 years ago. We did it with the student council. It was actually a different motivation. It had to do about a lot of people feeling left out because some groups were always on the screens in the library and etc. It was a little more nuanced and complicated. And credit to all those kids that are very likely adults today that moved forward and worked on that. Where are you with banning phones? Because now it's kind of the flavor of the month. John Haidt says there should be no phones in schools. We should get rid of the laptops. Sophie Wilkman is far more explicit about that, and they're quite clear that there's increased body of research that basically it just generates anxiety. Kids cannot manage multitasking. They already have attention deficit disorder issues, blah blah blah, and we go on. When you go into a school and they say, we're thinking of banning phones, what do you say?
I say, what are the students thinking? Right? You're thinking of banning phones. Have you talked to the students? So I really want to get that student perspective. I think Jonathan Haidt has done a really nice job of getting folks to focus on our young people's health. Okay. One problem I have with the book is he doesn't really talk to kids in the book. There's another book, Behind Their Screens, by Carrie James and Emily Weinstein. And one of the things that I really like about that book is that they talked to young people. They talked to teenagers. And so there are the concerns, and then there's the teenager view on those concerns, which enlighten us to consider a few different things. And so I just prefer that approach. And so I think my take, John, is that some school communities need a phone ban and some school communities don't. And some schools, I was just talking with a middle school here in Europe who's absolutely not going to ban phones. And it's because they feel like they've got a really good handle on it. They are talking with young people about their online, offline lives and when certain tools should be used. And they have some, policies around how you can use your personal technology. But it's not just, the Wild West. But that school doesn't need a full-on phone ban, right? I talked. I really appreciated what the American school in Japan is doing in their high school. It's actually a sort of a student-generated process. The students decided they wanted to experiment with every classroom having sort of the calculator cubbies in the back
Yeah,
where
yeah, we did
they
that in
charge their phone.
Luxembourg. That's great.
And they wanted 100% of the classrooms to follow that, right? They recognized we can't do this on our own. We don't want it to be some kids
Nice.
and not all kids. We don't want it to be some. We want to try this. Now, I don't know where they are at in their process now, but they still had phones in hallways, you know, which some people are going to say, oh, you can't do that. It doesn't work. You got to get completely 100%. Well, or let's empower students to experiment with how this is working and then reflect on how it's working. So I really like their process, that they've included the students and the students came up with a solution to try. And of course, John, with so many things, it's something we have to keep revisiting and keep talking about. I'm actually in Hungary right now, and I'm going to the American International School Budapest tomorrow, where the government said no phones in schools. And so
Yeah,
they didn't even
that's
get
often,
to
yeah.
go. Yeah, they didn't even get to go
Yeah,
through a process.
yeah. And
So
that's happening in the state that I live in, Switzerland. The government is it's on the docket to ban phones. There's, you know, and I know that in France that's the same issue. They've been quite adamant about that. Why do you think schools are quick to ban phones but not quick to get student voice?
I think people are alarmed. I think, um, I think you've got teachers who have one of the most difficult jobs in the world, and you've and they're dealing with classroom management difficulties. You have students who, well, you have humans who have a difficult time managing notifications and distractions and being focused um, on what they need to be focused on at the time. And I think for many schools, sort of the Jonathan Haidt really bringing a lot of uh, bringing the noise, so to speak, right? Like he's everywhere. And I think it became a groundswell for folks. It was like they're already feeling like there's a problem, so let's grab onto this solution. Now,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's not been a researched solution, um, and we don't eat, again, to my point, that some schools don't need it. That Yeah, anyway, so yes, so that's why I think, because it's like there's this groundswell, people are doing it, governments are doing it. But John, there's research being used in some of these government findings where the researchers themselves are upset how their research is being misused. And
Oh,
I think,
absolutely. No, no, no. And I think the research out of the UK, that's something that they were talking about. And also, my big thing about the book Anxious Generation is that in South Korea and in Asia, there's been a lot of work done with internet addiction in China and South Korea, and there's no mention of any data points from there. It's very kind of Anglo-centric, you know, European. And I'm wondering if also, and you might be able to address that. Do you think in different multicultural settings there is a different perception of phone? Because you travel and
John,
you go to other schools.
I know this. I know in different settings, there's different perceptions of parenting responsibilities. There's different perceptions of education. There's different perceptions of everything. So
Yeah.
yes, I don't think there is a one size sort of fits all approach. Um, but I would go
And
back to, I when it comes to a phone ban, um, I mean, I guess I haven't said this part yet. What I hope doesn't happen, I don't want kids to be hearing, we think technology's bad. We think phones are bad. Put the phone down. Like, if that's the only message they're hearing, one, I think we're alienating them, because they don't think their phones are bad. That's where they hang out with their friends, and that's where they create stuff, and that's where they play with their friends. And so in a way, if we're just telling them that their culture, young person culture, is bad or wrong, or that adults don't like it, I think they're less likely to talk with us about where they actually do need help. And so when I think about what phone bans, what schools could be doing well with phone bans, is it would be to really get around your messaging and know what it is that you're saying. So you could be saying, we really believe strongly that kids will feel better about themselves if they are known and they are in a community of face-to-face relationships. And we believe so strongly in that, that for 7 hours a day, we're going to not have the phones available because we want you to focus on face-to-face relationships. And then, of course, the schools need to make sure that they're not just sitting kids in desks and rows and lecturing at them, right? We need to have collaboration, right? We need to have kids, social, emotional, like learning going on as well. And so if it's just phones are bad, put them down. I think that's not a very good implementation. I think it could do more harm with our young people not trusting us as adults. But if we can get around like the fact that these things are very distracting, and not just for kids, but for adults as well. We are struggling too with controlling our own attention, and then making that more of it's about academic focus. It's about focus on relationships and being known. I think we could do a better job of selling a phone ban.
And I think it's really important what you're highlighting is what is the message that we're sending, because the message also is how different people interpret it. And if it's the sense of community face to face, as you're stating, and creating environments and moments and spaces in school where kids can come together and there can be that shared friendship and getting to know each other without the screen, I think that's just so important. How much do you think a school's intrinsic capacity to have digital skills, not only amongst kids, but amongst teachers, helps in that conversation with phone bans?
I think I understood the question, John, to be, does the tech savviness of the adults make a difference here?
Or
And
school, as a school, that there's a very explicit digital fluency curriculum. So digital device management, digital citizenship, digital literacy, all those kind of the DQ. If you think of the 8 digital intelligences, I'm just curious. In your work, are you noticing schools that have really embraced that and made this kind of where it's become intrinsic, where people just have it in the curriculum as a transdisciplinary skill? It's quite explicit. Do you find those schools that have reached that, I don't know if you want to call it maturity or that point, they're maybe struggling less with the conversation around phones?
well, I mean, I have examples, and I don't know that I could take those examples and create sort of a rich data set. But I do think there are leaders in some schools who have prioritized sort of digital citizenship, and talk to teachers and school communities that really feel like we are teaching the whole child here. We're not just teaching our subject areas. When there's a commitment to that, I do think it's a different conversation, because one thing I worry about with a phone ban in schools is that we might just say, oh, solved, done. And then we're not engaging these young people in conversations about their online lives. And these young people are going to go into a world, even if we ban phones, that they're going to go into this world where they're going to shift pretty seamlessly online and offline, outside of school, and then in the real world once they leave our school. And so we need to equip them with that. We need to let them practice in some safe spaces. We need to be engaging them in these conversations about how to treat people well online and offline. So it has to be something that doesn't fall through the cracks.
And do you find that can you still be motivated and create meaningful digital fluency programs and not have phones in the school?
Uh, I'm sure you can, just like I think you can have a conversation with your child about pornography without watching it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's something you can say, hey, we know this social media exists. Let's talk about some of those feelings that people, yes, absolutely, John. You don't have to have the device available to be able to have a conversation about it.
But it sounds like one of your fears that you expressed is that we ban the phones and then we close the door and we're done.
Yeah, I worry that we think that cyberbullying, which is a word people like to toss around, like cyberbullying is just going to go away. Well, what might happen in a phone-free school is that there's less of it happening during the day, but it could still happen after school. And my point is that our young people are still going to be emotionally impacted. And so our systems of support still need to be in place. And we still need to be doing that training up of young people through some social emotional learning and digital fluency curriculum. We can't say that this phone ban is going to solve that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think it's so important. And I think sometimes, as you said, uh, previously, is that different schools are in different places, and some might just be at the point where we're just going to do this because it's a quick fix, and now we can have those other conversations. Maybe it's just a respite, it's a pause, because things might have become too complex to really manage, and sometimes that can be something. Now, and there's also, and Jonathan hates a lot of the webinars that I've been watching in multiple times in different contexts. He talks about getting rid of the devices. So devices not as phone devices, but no laptops. And he kind of highlights how his university course, there are no laptops. How do you, and Sophie Wilkenman also talks about this quite extensively. What's your stance? Okay, so we banned the phones, but we have laptops. And some people will say, well, it's just like having a phone. I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I don't pretend to be a researcher in this area. I certainly am involved in helping parents and young people to create some healthy digital habits. And I guess, John, I come from the approach that we're living in this world, and I think we need to scaffold. We absolutely need to have boundaries, but those boundaries, we have to break them down over time. Eventually, these young people are going to be emancipated and be off making all the decisions for themselves. And so we want to figure out for our own families when that is that they get these different levels of autonomy. And we want to coach them and mentor them through that. And so I guess I would say, when it comes to like the work I do with families, if you want to ban whatever, well, there, you've got your solution. But if you want to slowly give your child more autonomy so that when they become 18 and leave the house, they've been trained up on these things under your care, that's what I want to help with. I want to help parents to think about different ways that they can set boundaries and slowly evolve those boundaries so that these young people gain confidence in making healthy choices.
Nice. Why has it taken us so long to have these conversations? I mean, now it's 2024, and you're working with many different international schools. Phones have been around a long time. This screen time issue is not from yesterday, from not from today. I'm just wondering, why are schools now? Oh, we're going to ban phone. Why is there suddenly? Is it really just one book that has generated that? Do you think?
Well, I think Jonathan Haidt deserves credit for putting a spotlight on the situation. Definitely. I don't know, John, if we got to, I mean, you and I handed out laptops to young people years and years and years ago. And we helped parents to figure out then how to set boundaries around those devices. And then years later, it was the parents putting these smaller devices in the hands of kids called phones. And I don't know if it just crept up. I mean, I think some schools have had policies, John. In fact, I would point to a lot of middle schools that have had phone policies for a long time that didn't need anyone to tell them, right? They didn't need someone to come in and say, oh my gosh, you've got to do something about this. They saw in their lunchrooms and their meeting places before school that they were losing some of the face-to-face relationship building opportunities that young people had. And so they said, once you're on campus, the phone goes in the locker, or whatever they did, right? And they didn't make a huge deal about it. They might not have even had to communicate it to the home. But now, John, we have them on our wrists and in our pockets and in front of our eyes, the smart glasses now. And so I think, I think it did in many high schools sort of get to the point where teachers were really feeling like students are not managing this distraction. And I think they felt sort of powerless.
Yeah, no, and I think it's so interesting that, as you're stating, years ago, I think more middle schools did it. It was maybe easier. There were less kids with smartphones, but I think in a high school context, usually by 15, 14, 15, the smartphone's kind of almost a non-negotiable. You need to have one. So I think it's interesting, your observation. So one of the things that we talked about it earlier in the podcast is the idea about the attention economy, and you talk about highlighting it to kids, and kids don't like being tricked. And there's been some more work on this topic, and these two researchers at Harvard, Yakub Chaudhry and Joni Penn, talk about how we're moving away from an attention economy, but to an intention economy. And I'm wondering, when you hear that, so where it is really, it's about understanding our intentions. We've got our attention, and now we are curating and choreographing our intentions. And with the algorithms and the sophistication of large language models and how these are embedded in a lot of the ecosystems that we interact with, like chatbots and etc. I'm just curious, what are you thinking here as you look down 2-3 years time? What are you thinking the challenges that we maybe face as you're working with schools on a phone that's a kind of an old technology? What are you thinking as all these artificial intelligence ecosystems become embedded in our daily lives? And this idea of the work of these two researchers out of Harvard, that we're going away from attention to intention, where we start working on being able to curate decision making.
Well, John, you're much more of a futurist than I am. And I love that your brain always goes there. I'm just trying to keep up with today. But I haven't seen the work from these folks, but just my own quick thinking on it is that I love the idea of being intentional, because I'm getting to talk with some seniors this coming week, and I'm excited to talk with them about being intentional, in that they are leaving the home where parents and adults have sort of had quite a bit of control over, and they've released it probably over time. But these young people are going to go out and be free to make all the decisions, right? And what I worry about for young people today is that they won't be free. They will let the phone sort of tell them what to do, and the phone will tell them to keep watching or keep clicking or look at this, right? And so I'm going to talk with them about, what constraints would you want to set on yourself so that you're actually doing the stuff you want to do to become the person you want to become, right? I mean, that is the challenge with these devices, and our seniors who are leaving the nest, so to speak, are moving from a place that's been highly curated and scheduled for them, right? Like parents today are really scheduling their kids to make sure they've got the instrument tutor and the academic tutor, and make sure they're on a number of teams, and they're getting fed and wake up at this time. And parents are even GPS locating kids that are going off to college, right? There's this level of parental control.
It's so funny that you say that, Patrick, about the GPS, because I remember being in a school and I have an AirTag, and I went on my phone and just all these AirTags. And I was like, what are all these people with AirTags? So sorry, I'm interrupting you, but it just is a great point that you bring up.
So I think we have to be intentional. And if no one brings that to our mind, right, we have to realize if we scroll all day, that's what we are going to do our whole life. Right? Like if we don't ever stop to think, do I want to be doing something else? Is what I'm doing helping me get to where I want to be or who I want to become? I don't want these young people to miss out on the potential relationships and learning that they could by looking around and seeing who's around them, right? And so we have to be more intentional about not being distracted, not letting the phone sort of control us. So that's my initial thought there, is like, yeah.
Excellent. No, that's yeah. I love it that you're going to meet with seniors and talk about what are you going to do so you're not. I'm kind of summarizing. What are you going to do
Yeah.
so you don't walk out scrolling, and you might be walking out with your eyes open and saying, "Oh, I never thought of that. Oh, this sounds really interesting."
Yeah. And then the other thing I was going to say, John, to sort of what's out there in the future, I think sometimes parents feel with a new technology, let's say AI, that they need to know more about it to be able to talk with a child about it, but they don't. And I try to make that really clear to parents that I'm working with, that you don't actually need to know anything about AI to talk to your child about AI. Because when you talk to your child about AI, you're actually talking about your family values. Those are the things you know really well. And so you can ask a question about AI without knowing anything about it. And it goes something like this, John. Have you ever heard of AI? I mean, you could just start the conversation. And then, have you ever used AI? Are kids your age using AI? What do you think is an ethical use of AI? Like, John, I didn't have to know anything about AI to ask any of these questions, right? And
Yeah.
this is what I think is that parents worry. Like, I'm worried about my kid in AI. Well, don't until you ask them about AI. Once you've asked them a couple questions, you'll know, should I be worried? Should I not be worried?
Yeah.
But we have to be having those conversations, John. And I don't think that not having enough info or having clicked around enough myself, I don't think that should stop you.
No, I can't agree with you more. And I think also that translates to the classroom, where teachers don't need to know the latest about technology, but they could ask questions like you do, and based on the answers, because we have the wisdom, the pedagogic expertise. And there is sometimes this, and I really appreciate you bringing this up. There is this feeling I have to be an expert in everything. No, you have to be an expert in good human communications and developing meaningful conversations to understand somebody. And I think what you're saying here is no, you don't need to know about AI, but you could ask them what is maybe a good way to use AI. I like the way you framed those questions, and I think that's really important message, is that you don't have to be an expert to have a meaningful and purposeful conversation with a child.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to AI, I think because it's so new and it's evolving so quickly, it's easy to fall into that trap. I have to tell
Yeah.
you, John, I'm kind of glad I'm not doing technology integration in schools right now, because, like, I know I can't keep up. There's no
Well, you can't.
way. Yeah, you can't. You can't keep up with it all. But you can have general conversations about. I mean, when we talk in schools, I think if you ask people what their number one concern is, and this might go for parents as well, parents might have a few other concerns, but teachers, educators have a concern that they don't want young people to offload the struggle that is required in learning to the bot, right? if they're asking a child to do something, it's because they believe that that child needs to struggle with that concept or whatever to get to a different point, right? To get to a new learning. And they don't. The child won't learn if they offload it.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
there's so much more to AI than that, right?
Yeah.
And we young people could be using AI in 1,000 ways that doesn't offload that heavy lifting. And I think even just having that conversation with young people, here's what I don't want you to do with AI. And then, and I know I suspect there might be educators who are feeling like I'm oversimplifying it. Yes, we need to be looking at our assessments, John. And there is a little bit of, AI proofing, but I would say even before AI, we needed to be thinking about what are we actually asking students to do? And is it meaningful? Does it have transferable skills, right? Like,
that, Patrick, I think is the important statement you're saying. Forget the AI. Is it meaningful what we're doing? Is it transferable? Is it requiring kids to think deeply, problem solve, critically think? You know, AI, of course, if you're not doing that, then of course AI is going to be offloaded. Of course the kid's going to offload it to AI. I mean, so I think your point's a very important one. It's not the AI, it's the kind of questions we're asking ourselves about the learning. And in the context that you're talking about phones is what kind of questions are we asking? And throughout this whole podcast, you've talked always about the student first, is we need to start the conversation with the student. And I'm going to put you on the spot here. How many schools, and you just can give me I know you're not a researcher, but would you say many schools that go through this process, the student voice is not the first thing that happens?
well, yeah, I would say, John, in most schools, we might even have student voice as something that we really care about, right? In a school, like that might be one of the pillars. Yeah, I was saying even if that student voice is one of the pillars of sort of what your school is about, it is hard for us to remember that we need to go there. And many schools don't even have sort of a process or protocol for how they involve students. I'm glad we're not talking about the phone ban anymore, because I do kind of get tired of that topic. But when you think about a phone ban, like, did you collect data? Do you have a way of collecting data from students? And we could ask them. But sometimes we don't even have that. Like, how do we approach it? Some schools do have a good sort of student council system involved. I think in general, John, the answer is, as you suspected, that we just don't do a great job of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for highlighting throughout your conversation and the different strategies how student voice was kind of the pillar of those conversations and the pillar of the way to engage, and that idea of shared agency where the parent is sitting down with the child, they're both comparing their uses of their phone and not pointing fingers but looking at it in a very neutral way and saying, oh, look what we can learn from this, look what I'm learning from this, oh, look what you're learning from this. And I think that is just such a very positive way to approach this. Patrick, at the end of our podcast, we always ask our guests, what is one thing you want a school leader to think about or walk away with from this conversation? And what would you want uh, a teacher? And as of today, we are officially starting What Would You Want a Student to Think? Thank you, Patrick, for reminding us about how important student voice is. And I feel terrible that over the last 160 podcasts we've done, we haven't focused on that question. So I apologize to the students around the world. And thank you, Patrick. So let's start. What do you want a school leader to walk away with? A teacher and then a student. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think I'd want a leader to really be thinking about, can we make our messaging something that we can share with our parents so that we're all sharing the messaging? So you and I talked a lot about phone bans today, but I just wonder, can we package that up and make sure that our families can also talk about what really matters? Because if we're saying put the phone down, and then at home they're saying put the phone down, all that kids are hearing is adults telling them to put the phone down. And we actually have some reasons behind that are way more important than putting the phone down. So then I would say, for teachers, man, it is an overwhelming time to be a teacher. So I would say, I would hope that you might find some time to talk with young people about their online lives, because you are the original influencer. Like, you probably went, but because you enjoyed working with young people and being a mentor and a coach and a guide and helping see people get to a new place. So I would encourage you to lean into that. Thing
Nice.
about AI to do that. You just have to know kids. And then kids, I try not to use the word kids when I talk with teens, but students, young people, I would want them to walk away knowing that their voice matters, and that when adults are going to come seeking their input, and I hope they're ready.
Thank you, Patrick. Just thank you so much for kind of doing this arc, and really throughout the arc really talking about how it's okay if you don't know something. It's about having those conversations, asking questions, being willing to listen to the student voice, and understanding that they have and also understanding that it's a shared journey. And I think also something that I think you really emphasized that I think is a big takeaway is what kind of messaging, what are the messages that you're sending out? How are you constructing them? How are they, the messaging supporting both students and parents? And there's a clear why. And it's just not about putting the phone down, that there's more to it than that. I want to remind our audience, Patrick Green has a wonderful website called Winning Screentime, and you can find him on LinkedIn, on YouTube. He has a lot of great resources, and of course, he's working with schools on this topic. So it's really exciting to see you, Patrick, working with schools and going in person and engaging the communities with the expertise and the knowledge and the wisdom that you're bringing to the table. Patrick, thank you so much. I want to also thank the audience for the continual support. We got more LinkedIn members, and the comments and feedback. It's greatly appreciated. Patrick, thank you again. Safe travels as you continue your journey on winning screen time or supporting parents to understand the complexities and knowing that they're not alone. Really appreciate you spending the time with us today.
Thanks, John. Always a pleasure to get to talk to you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you at the next podcast. Bye.